putting Mali back together if Mali wants it. World politicians are searching now for a peace that can work. You're watching Arise News Hour, and that's our top story. Officials from the UN, Europe, and Africa are meeting in Brussels to talk about elections and unity. There are many in Mali who don't want either. We'll have the context.
Also in the program tonight, saving the treasures of Timbuktu. After the tanks, the historians move in the hope of saving one of Africa's most important historic sites. Plus, piracy's on the rise again. More attacks off the coast of West Africa. We'll talk to the man who has to fight it. And giving them a chance against the $20 billion palm oil industry. We'll look at the choices.
They gathered in Brussels today to try to sort out a future for Mali. Politicians and officials from Mali, from the UN, and from the African and European unions. 45 delegations with money and plans for unity and elections. The question they face is whether the splits between factions, north and south, army and civilians, are just too great. We'll have a report from the meeting.
And in Mali, almost 2,000 soldiers from Chad have entered Kidal, the last major town in northern Mali under rebel control. Islamist fighters fled last week and Tuareg separatists took control. Now the town's set to change hands again. Tonight's report starts in Brussels. The location, Brussels. The aim, to find a way to achieving lasting peace and stability in Mali once the foreign military have left. Representatives included members of the United Nations and the African Union. On the agenda was the security and humanitarian situation following last year's coup and the offensive against Islamic militants. As he arrived for the meeting, Tiamin Coulibaly, the foreign minister, told reporters, "We regret the fact that civilians are going to be affected by the conflict. The world has to unite with us to help us get rid of the jihadists. Of course, we realize the trouble we caused to our population. We feel for those who lost their lives. We regret this, but we have to free our territory." One of the questions being discussed in Brussels is how to finance and organize rebuilding Mali and how to hold elections, which have been set for the 31st of July.
Clearly, first of all, the operation run by the Malian army and the French army has to be completed. We need to get in there with the European Union training mission and get the Malian army trained up. We need to start moving in development assistance to Mali. But most importantly of all, I think that the Malian people have to get the political process going again. The roadmap is a great basis for that. And so, while there are difficulties along the way, things have improved with the amazing international response there's been to this crisis. We really are optimistic that things will improve.
In parts of Mali itself, the situation remains calm since the takeover by the French and Malian troops. They launched an intervention last month after Islamic militants moved south and threatened the capital of Bamako. Since then, the militants have been driven from populated areas in the north and east. Today, nearly 2,000 Chad troops entered Kidal, the only major town that is still controlled by the rebels. In Mopti, 8 suspected Islamic militants were detained after being found with weapons. The men, 6 from Mali, a Nigerian and an Algerian, will be transferred to the capital, Bamako, where they will stand trial. The Attorney General, Alfacine Diop, said some of the men had weapons of war on them. After questioning, they admitted they were members of the Islamic groups, and that is why they have been arrested. With the military assault on the Islamic rebels nearly over, the focus is now on diplomacy and how to ensure lasting security in Mali. And right now you are looking at a live picture of a press conference following the meeting there in Brussels as they report on the discussion between the European Union, the African Union, as well as other aid organizations about how to stabilize Mali, how to bring this country to a place of normalization after conflict for so long. Right, Jeff?
Indeed. And also they're talking money, lots of money, which is needed to restore Mali, put Mali back on track. This is why they're all meeting there in Brussels. And it looks like hopefully there'll be some results sooner rather than later.
Yes, and we'll let you know exactly what they are disseminating during this press conference as soon as we are able. Well, life has returned to normal now in Timbuktu, and the work has just begun. Efforts are underway to assess the damage to the historic city from the conflict and its occupation by Islamic rebels. The World Heritage Site was an ancient center of Islamic learning and is home to a medieval mosque and hundreds of thousands of priceless manuscripts. Now that militants have been driven out by French forces, UNESCO says it's planning to send a team to Timbuktu to see what survived. It is still unclear how much damage has been done to the manuscripts. There are unconfirmed reports, though, that most have been smuggled to safety before the unrest began.
Now, Africans who work and live abroad send a lot of money home each year. Our economics and business editor, Michael Wilson, has the numbers. You can tell us exactly how much was sent home in 2012. Michael, how much?
Thanks, Jeff. Well, it's all about inflows of money. The African diaspora, as Jeff said, those who live and work overseas, sent home $60 billion last year. Nigerians led the way, remitting a total of $21 billion, or about 10% of the country's gross national product. But sending money home comes with a price. The costs to sub-Saharan Africa are the most expensive in the world at 12%. That's higher than the global average of 8% and double the cost of sending money to South Asia. According to the World Bank, remittances play a crucial role in helping families invest in the future. So bringing down those prices will have a significant impact on reducing poverty. Now, in the stock markets, Nigeria's all share punched above the 33,000 point mark. Stocks in Lagos are trading at 4-year highs. South African shares closed a fraction higher today. And in Kenya, the NSE 20 rose for the 5th straight session. Oil, as far as commodities are concerned, edged slightly up as investor concerns faded about political risks in the Eurozone. But there's still an ample supply, and it's thought that might hinder the price going higher in the short term. Platinum, well, an improving global economic outlook has helped the precious metal. Demand increases for its use in industrial production and jewellery. Cocoa. Now, here's an interesting one. The dusty seasonal Harmattan winds are hindering new pods on the Ivory Coast. There's been no measurable rainfall since the onset of the dry season in December. That may affect production and thus the price tends to rise. Quick look at the currencies. $1 will buy you 8.85 Rand or 157 Naira. And in Kenya, that's 87 shillings and 55 cents. South African farm workers are getting a pay rise, but not everyone's pleased about it. The minimum wage will increase by up to 50% to 105 Rand a day. That's about $12 American. The government conducted a wage review after violent strikes in the fruit-growing regions of the Western Cape last year. Farm owners argue higher salaries will lead to job losses and even more unrest at a time when fuel and electricity costs have been rising as well. The minimum wage rise to just under $12 a day will take effect from March the 1st, but agricultural work is irregular and seasonal. I spoke to our correspondent, Cindy Bishop, who was at an agricultural union conference just outside Pretoria.
Okay, the workers yesterday threatened that should there be any job losses, because the farmers have hinted that should we be forced to pay the workers this kind of money, we may have to lay off some people. And the workers said if there are any layoffs, we are going to occupy their land forcefully. And the farmers took that as a declaration of war, saying if that's the case, then they're going to have to ask the government to protect them, protect their property and protect everything that they have to treasure. And apart from that, they say, regardless of the fact that they will be laying off people and there will be a reaction to it, normally farmers get killed in South Africa 3 times more than an ordinary person. So this is a very scary period for them.
Indeed, and actually the workers wanted 150 Rand, didn't they, as a minimum wage? So they can't be satisfied with what they're being offered.
definitely they cannot be satisfied with what they're being offered. Right now, the workers, an average salary for the workers is about 70 to 75 rand a day. They wanted 150 rand a day. And the farmers are saying, you know what, if we're paying you 150 rand a day, it means we also going to look at the cost for our the petrol price, look at the cost for the diesel price, look at the cost for the electricity price, and all that is about to come up. As I'm speaking to you, the diesel and the petrol price are going up tomorrow. Petrol price by 41 cents a litre. And they're saying, looking at all those input costs, there is no way we can now afford to pay every worker that we have in the farm 150. And look at this, looking at the situation of the different farming methods we have, you cannot compare farmers in Cape Town who are farming wine and farmers who are farming oranges in the northern Transvaal. So there is no way that you can put a blanket 150 minimum wage per day. At least there should be a resolution on who pays what in the meantime.
So do you think, in a sense, the farmers have a point?
You know, when you look at the cost of living in this country, 80 rands a day, it is nothing. 80 rands a day can only buy you bread, milk and butter and nothing else. You won't be able to get vegetables out of it. You won't be able to get meat out of it. So 80 rands a day, really, it is nothing. So the workers have a point. 150 rand a day, it's also nothing, but it will make a difference in their lives. But if you're looking at the farmer's point of view as well, both arguments really hold water. The input costs in this country for farmers have gone really high. Fertilizers have been expensive for many, many years, and they've been crying about the quality of water in this country. Some of them have to put down their own boreholes to improve the quality of water. So all those things, including the fact that they're not protected against imports from outside the country, the government won't interfere with imports or exports. So they're not even competing fairly with European countries. So those really, they do have a problem.
City Bishop in Johannesburg. That's the business for now. Still to come, moving towards the new conflict-free gold standard. That story for you later.
Looking forward to that, Michael. See you later in the news hour. Now, it is John Kerry's second day in the State Department, and he's warning North Korea on nuclear tests. Our Washington correspondent Colin Campbell joins us live. Colin, what's that about?
Well, John Kerry did say he had some big heels to fill, didn't he? And that's because he's following in the footsteps of former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. His first challenge may be dealing with North Korea and whether or not it decides to conduct a third nuclear test. And why this is important is U.S. officials are trying to determine if North Korea will be using plutonium or uranium. Uranium is seen as a much more menacing part of a nuclear arsenal. North Korea is already believed to have about 6 or so plutonium bombs made from the early 2000s. So this is something that would raise alarms for South Korea, the U.S., and allies in the region. Kerry has already spoken to his counterpart in South Korea, Kim Sung-hwan, about how they would respond to North Korea if they did conduct a third nuclear test. They haven't sent out any details on what this response would be, but this may be Kerry's actual first challenge, something that former Secretary of State Clinton warned about before leaving her official post.
Okay, Colin, at the same time, there's a memo coming out of the State Department about Americans abroad. What is that about?
Well, this is also something that's highly controversial that just came out this week. This is a 16-page memo that was released that talked about the rationale for killing Americans overseas if they were believed to be senior operational leaders of Al-Qaeda. Now, this killing could happen whether or not there's actual proof of if they were going to attack the U.S. or if they were charged or arrested for any crime. And so this memo actually discussed the rationale behind the killings of Anwar al-Awlaki and Samir Khan. This is going to be a very serious topic coming up for debate in the hearings for John Brennan as he tries to head the CIA. He's a former counterterrorism official for the White House. He's been nominated to run the CIA. He's been credited for running the U.S.'s drone program, where they use similar intel to take out what they believe to be our enemy combatants. So this is going to be a highly controversial topic, and we're not going to be hearing the last of it now. We're going to may be hearing a lot more about it towards the end of the week in these hearings.
Colin, thanks for that. We'll leave it at that for now. Colin Campbell, our correspondent there in Washington, D.C.
Gunmen have attacked an oil barge in Nigeria's Niger Delta region, killing 2 soldiers and 1 crew member. They fled when soldiers returned fire, but it comes as investigators are looking for a French ship hijacked off the Ivory Coast this weekend. 17 crew members were on board in the latest attack by the criminal gangs targeting ships.
This is the Gascoigne, the French-owned Luxembourg-flagged tanker hijacked on Monday. It's the second vessel to be seized in the region in less than 3 weeks and has raised concerns that the area is becoming a new pirate hotspot. Ivory Coast Maritime Director says the tanker is in Nigerian waters, but his country has limited resources to find it. Bertin Kofi Tanu said, "We have very few means. I will say that we do not have the means to monitor all areas off the Ivory Coast." The number of ships being hijacked has risen in recent years, with criminal gangs targeting ships to steal their cargo or hold it for ransom. But now, victims are hitting back. This was a rescue by Korean Navy commandos 2 years ago. They stormed a ship hijacked by Somali pirates in the Indian Ocean, rescuing all the 21 crew and killing 8 of the pirates. In another incident, commandos arrested 10 Somali pirates when they stormed this Hamburg-registered ship off the Horn of Africa. The owners of the Gascoigne say they've lost communication with the ship since Sunday, but are yet to receive any demands from the pirates. Nick Jennings, Arise News.
So is this the beginning of a new piracy black spot off West Africa? Chris Trelawney, head of maritime security at the International Maritime Organization, joins us here in the studio. Chris, is the Gulf of Guinea now, I guess it seems like the new Somali coastline? Is that what it's looking like?
I don't believe it is. We've seen a number of incidents of both piracy attacks and also armed robbery against ships in West Africa for a number of years. The piracy off West Africa is actually different to the piracy off Somalia. Off Somalia, it's primarily about kidnap and ransom. It's about seizing the ship, seizing the crew, holding them until a ransom is paid. Off West Africa, it's primarily about theft. And in this case, increasingly about oil theft, theft of hydrocarbons, fuel, etc. And that is the target. So although the ships are taken, they're held, generally, once the cargo is removed, the ships are then released.
Even though it seems like there's been a startling uptick in these attacks, can you explain why this is happening now?
The numbers of attacks reported over the last few years has been relatively consistent. The number of attacks reported to the International Maritime Organization last year were actually down 5% on the previous year. There is an increased focus on piracy in West Africa, partly because the piracy off Somalia is decreasing, and partly because the United Nations Security Council has taken an interest, so it's a higher profile.
It was easier to hide ships, especially in the Somali coast, when they were hijacked. They were hidden in those creeks, I guess, if you will. Is the same being done in West Africa? And also, how do they get rid of that oil? How do they sell off the oil?
Yeah, this is the key to the question. These tankers are being taken. Several thousand tons of oil on board is being landed somewhere. And the question really is, who's not noticing? What's being done ashore? Piracy and armed robbery are shore-based problems. They're organized criminal activities solved by good policing ashore. In Somalia, you didn't have a fully functioning government. You don't have the rule of law. Whereas in most West African countries, you actually have a functioning state, you have law enforcement capability. So it's a case of harnessing that, focusing it for better treatment of the problem.
So I wonder what we'll do. What will you do to address this and to hopefully, if not eliminate, at least decrease the frequency of attacks?
Right. IMO is working on several levels. We're working with the states in the region, basically trying to promote a joined-up approach to maritime security and maritime law enforcement across the board. Piracy and armed robbery, are one of several crimes that we're interested in. Illegal fishing is a major strategic threat to the region. Smuggling of drugs, weapons, people, just ordinary crime as well, and then piracy on top of that. So all of them require very similar things. They require a legal framework to deal with it. They require the capability to get out and interdict and arrest. They require successful prosecutions and situational awareness as to where all the vessels are, where the threats are, and so on. So we're working with the governments there. We're also working with the economic blocs, ECOWAS, ECAS, Gulf of Guinea, to put in a regional approach to it as well. Because it's a transnational crime, there needs to be cooperation between the states and the region to address it.
If I can ask just very quickly, have you received any contact, heard anything from the French ship that was taken over the weekend?
No, I mean, we're not an operational organisation in that sense, so we wouldn't get that. What has happened in the past is the ships are taken, they disappear, and then they reappear once the oil's taken off, largely somewhere in Nigeria.
Chris, thanks so much for your insights. Appreciate that. That's Chris Trelawney, Head of Maritime Security at the International Maritime Organization. Moving right along. Senegal's education system was neglected for much of the 12-year rule of former President Abdoulaye Wade. According to the World Bank, the previous Senegalese education system was riddled with corruption and inefficiency. It apparently paid over $88 million to more than 5,000 teachers who didn't actually exist. Senegal's new government is determined to overhaul the whole sector, but near constant teacher strikes and a lack of resources are making that a challenging task.
At Senegal's University of Dakar, classes that were meant to start last October are still not underway. In this West African country's largest university, classrooms are empty and the students are in limbo. Public universities like this one are suffering from exploding student populations, lack of facilities, and shrinking budgets. And at a recent conference in Dakar, education experts reported that even when they are able to graduate, many Senegalese students are not competitive in the global job market.
D'éducation et de formation sont dans une
The education and schooling systems are stuck in a certain way of thinking that just only offers what they have, which conditions them to continue their studies instead of progressively looking at a different way of teaching that will respond to the demands from the business community and the public sector.
Des communautés, des entreprises, du secteur public, ainsi de suite.
To meet an increasing demand for higher education, many private institutions have set up in Dakar. Courses here at the African Institute of Management began on time this year. Classrooms are packed, and students say private universities are worth the money.
After the bac, you have dreams. You want to be happy. You want to improve your life. You must do that in favorable conditions. In the public universities, truly the conditions are very bad. The work is very difficult, and there are lots of strikes.
In the meantime, at public universities where many students can't afford private schooling, the government's planned overhaul of its education sector can't come soon enough. India's Maha Kumbh Mela is the world's biggest religious festival, attracting close to 8 million people to the banks of the Ganges River. It's meant to be a spiritually uplifting occasion, but for the thousands of pilgrims lost in the swell of humanity, the Mela can be a terrifying ordeal. AFP's Charlotte Turner reports.
For millions of Hindu pilgrims, a visit to the world's largest religious festival, the Maha Kumbh Mela, is spiritually uplifting. A dip in the holy river Ganges is said to cleanse them of their sins. But for thousands who get lost in the swell of humanity, the experience can be terrifying.
I was walking in the bathing area and had my daughter by the hand, but due to the pressure of so many people, I got separated and lost in the crowd. I asked the police for help and they brought me here.
There are 17 camps for lost women and children dotted around the huge festival site. This 10-year-old boy and nearly a dozen elderly women are waiting for family to pick them up. The wait might take days, and some may never be found during the festival.
Most of them are collected by their own relatives, but for others who aren't, we have to send them back to their homes by train or by bus at our own costs.
Meanwhile, police are working hard to connect people with lost loved ones. They broadcast names and addresses scribbled on notes over public loudspeakers. But the most vulnerable often don't understand the information read out, and lost children are the biggest worry.
One of the danger for kids particularly is that some bad elements here might catch them and might be after them. That is one of the danger, but the police is there in all the corners, and I think we are particularly concerned about this, that kids are not lost. If they are lost, they are safely back to their relatives.
By mid-afternoon on the first day of the festival, nearly 6,000 were reported missing. Organisers expect 20 million people to gather on February the 10th, the most auspicious date of the 55-day event. Though many will inevitably get lost in the crowds, families should take special care to hold on to each other so nobody gets left behind.
Back to our lead story in that press conference in Brussels, the meeting of politicians and officials from Mali, from the UN, from the African Union and the European Union as well. And we're going to be bringing you those pictures as they come. If there's any sound that will be coming from it, we will be bringing it to you, but it's happening as we speak.
Let's see if we can hear what they're saying.
What will be the ongoing security and stabilization questions in northern Mali. And that's a question that all the organizations represented here discussed today, and it's primarily a question for the government of Mali, since this is sovereign Malian territory on which forces are currently operating. The question of whether the current force at the appropriate time becomes a UN peacekeeping force is one that ultimately the Security Council itself will have to discuss based on the input from these organizations, based on discussions with the government of Mali, and based on the collective understanding of what are the best tools to address the next phase in the stabilization efforts in northern Mali. It's worth keeping in mind that this will not be a situation where there's going to be a peace treaty or a ceasefire agreement or a disengagement agreement between militants and government forces, between two opposing sides. I don't think that those forces that have terrorized the citizens of Timbuktu and Gao and Kidal since last year are going to sit down at a table and sign a treaty that peacekeeping forces will be monitoring and implementing. So it really is a question, as President Ouedraogo said, of what is the best tool that the international community can support to address the next phase of Mali's peace and security. Thank you.
J'ai deux questions, une question à Lady Ashton et une question au ministre Coulibaly. Madame Ashton, vous avez dit que la communauté internationale condamne fermement des actes violents envers la population civile malienne. Mais ces derniers jours, on a enregistré
This is a question from Baroness Ashton of Britain. We're going to see what her answer is going to be. Hopefully it will be in English so that we can understand. Of course, this is a live picture again from Brussels, a press conference after a meeting all day to discuss how to stabilize Mali after almost a year of conflict and unrest.
And of course, Baroness Ashton is the EU foreign minister.
There are 45 delegations represented at this meeting. They are discussing of course, funds necessary to train the troops, of course, aid necessary to send in to the people. Food supplies are getting short. Medical attention is needed.
And of course, the way forward.
And the way
elections
forward.
And unifying Mali.
It seems that this is quite a long comment or question we were hoping to hear from Baroness Ashton.
Et secondo, après la visite du président français au Mali ces derniers jours,
really,
il a déclaré
this is a tightly wound ball of wax, if you will, for them to unravel. This conflict has gone on for months in a region that has been troubled for as long as we can remember.
Absolutely, and hopefully something will come out of it, Debbie. That's the most important thing. At least they are meeting, at least they have gathered, and at least we're getting reactions and responses. Let's hear what Baroness
Ashton is speaking.
Three very brief points, because I really do want those who've been engaged today to be leading on this discussion. One, we're very clear about the violence and about the acts that may be committed by anyone engaged in this. And I've been clear-cut throughout about how we feel and what we say about those acts of violence. The people have been subject in Mali to some terrible things. And you know, because many of you have been reporting or have colleagues who've been reporting from there. And we condemn all of that very clearly. We're also very clear in support of France and its efforts to try and engage and deal with the terrorists and to help and support the army of Mali to be able to take over and to be able to deal with this problem, because that in the end is the best solution. And to do so with the support that we can offer in training, which is not just about the training to be an army, but the training about how an army should be. And I hope it will be valuable and useful to all. And that's the basis on which we're operating.
Je voudrais d'abord vous dire que je souscris totalement à tout ce que Lady Ashton vient de dire. Le président du Mali a pris des positions très claires.
You are watching Arise News. We have been looking at pictures of the press conference going on right now at this very moment in Brussels after a day of meetings following our lead story on Mali and as they grapple with the issue of how to move forward to stabilize the region as well as provide the much needed funding for troops as well as aid.
Indeed, and now I think we're going to be joined live by our correspondent, or rather on the phone, our correspondent Sandra Gatman from Brussels. Sandra, you've been at the conference all day long. What are the prospects of a lasting peace?
Well, this is very much the big question, and I think lasting peace and stabilization was very much the theme of today's talks. This is a region where security has been a key concern for years now, and this was very much international leaders, the biggest gathering so far on Mali, getting together to nip it in the bud, as they say, and this way the French-led operation and how it's been defeating jihad's advances has a lasting legacy in the way that West African troops and boots are now on the ground and taking this fight into their own hands. So this is very much a long-haul effort, and it's very significant that we've had this broad participation today and representation here in Brussels.
Sandra, have you gotten a sense today as to whether or not the emphasis has been on the military approach to stabilizing Mali or the humanitarian aid that is necessary in the country?
Well, that was very much a contentious issue. Humanitarian aid from the European Union was frozen after the coup last year in March, and that has now been unfrozen and I think very, very much welcomed by the Malian authorities. The talks today were also in a part to update all the players involved on what the current military situation is, what some of the security concerns still are, but also where the operation has been successful and French boots are still taking care of some of the airstrikes that are happening north of Kidal. But as well, there was a key focus on where diplomacy can now run its course. One of the key pillars for long-term stability, say diplomats, is the advancement of national elections happening as early as July. They're talking about the 31st as a possible date. That will involve starting talks with non-terrorist groups, the MNLA, Tuareg rebels, crucially, who are holding on to the town of Kidal and claiming it as their own. And those negotiations are sure to pose some challenges, but they are crucial. The international pressure is to legitimize the process of democratization and set up legitimate elections.
Leaders meeting in Brussels may be talking the talk, but the question is, do they have the money to be able to walk the walk?
Well, certainly there were remarks made very early on in this conflict that Mali may be to France what Afghanistan has become for the U.S. and all partners involved in eradicating militants from the Middle East, except the fight is now, of course, in Africa, and that operation has become increasingly expensive. I think there's a very conscious effort for that not to be the case this time around. The European Union is pushing forward its training mission. It's only a few hundred staff strong, and they're equipping the Malian forces with know-how as opposed to putting their own boots on the ground. I think as well as the fact that West African states are contributing and are hopefully going to be leading efforts in Mali is reassuring to the international community. Now, of course, the long-term fear is retaliation, and as with any operation of this scale, we've seen ramifications already in the hostage crisis in Algeria. France has particularly been stepping up domestic security, and that has concerned Europe-wide as well as more broadly in the U.S. and neighboring regions. And I think that is a lingering concern that security is going to be on high alert, and Mali will continue to be high on the agenda.
All right, that is Sandra Gatman joining us live via the telephone from Brussels. Sandra, thank you so much. We appreciate that. We're going to go back to the press conference that's happening right now live in Brussels.
I hope these programs will also be specifically enabling that the government of Mali is able to pick up so as quickly as possible. And we can give you more detail as we move along. With apologies to colleagues, it's not a subject that's directly relevant to this. First of all, can I thank the government of Kazakhstan for hosting these talks? It'd be a great pleasure to be back there. Secondly, I hope that Iran is coming to these talks, and we've been in discussion, as you know, for a little while about dates and venues and moving forward, with a real sense that we want to make progress. In every round, I start from that principle that the purpose of meeting is to really engage, and I hope that we will see that this time. And I look forward to telling you how it went when we finished.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we have to wrap it up there, but I'm sure some of the delegates would be happy to answer some of them.
Baroness Ashton there in the EU in Brussels. Now, global demand for palm oil is huge. The low-cost fat is used in everything from margarine to soap to biofuel. And it all adds up to a business worth some $20 billion worldwide. Now, red fruit palm oil is being called a superfood, the health food industry's miracle find of 2013. Good news for palm oil producers in Asia and Africa. But as Arise News' Heather Scott reports, the United Nations Environment Programme says spiraling demand for palm oil is threatening the habitats of the great apes.
These palm nut farmers in Liberia are pounding oil from the nuts of the red fruit palm. They're at the very start of a supply chain stretching around the planet. Global demand for palm oil has doubled since 2000 and hit a record high in the first month of 2013.
As with any item that becomes a fad or a luxury item, especially in the developed world, red fruit palm oil has taken off very quickly, really in 2013 only, because it's been endorsed by several high-profile personalities as a medical cure-all. It's been given credit for being a weight loss supplement, for being the cure for cancer, for being an anti-aging supplement. At one point, it was described as being the miracle find of 2013.
More than 80% of palm oil nuts are grown in Indonesia and Malaysia. According to some estimates, an area the size of Greece is cleared every year for palm oil plantations. And experts warn that Africa's forests are next.
We're finding that Asia is really a test case for the patterns being played out in Africa regarding palm oil and the growth of oil palm plantations. And all of the same devastation and biological destruction and the loss of biodiversity that is occurring in Asia is hitting us now in Africa as well. We have to learn from these lessons. 80% of Asia's tropical rainforests were wiped out to convert into palm oil plantations. And we're seeing an even faster deforestation rate now in Africa as this boom grows.
A major concern is the destruction of habitats. The wild orangutan population in Indonesia has plummeted over the years, and the Sumatran orangutan is classified as critically endangered.
The proliferation of palm oil, the need for palm oil, the perceived need for palm oil, the uses to which palm oil is being put, both commercial and as part of the diet, is an enormous threat. It's just It's gone out of all proportion. It's just whoof like this.
Nigeria, Ghana, Cameroon and Ivory Coast are all major players in the palm oil business, and they're also home to endangered great ape populations. But the high profits of palm oil production leaves host countries with very difficult decisions. The average palm plantation can generate 6 times more palm oil than it could rapeseed and 10 times the yield of soy. Small wonder that palm oil has become the world's most important vegetable oil, and that demand is stripping forests across 2 continents. Heather Scott, Arise News.
Claire Rucastle-Brown is a journalist, and she's written exclusively on palm oil farming and its rapid expansion across Sarawak. And she joins us now in the studio. Thank you so much for being with us. Let's start with the basic. What is palm oil? Where does it come from? And generally, how is it being used?
Well, I think it's 1 in 10 of our supermarket products in any shop you go to is going to have palm oil in it. That shows how it has infiltrated our diet, and indeed products you wouldn't imagine, like cream and washing powder and hair shampoo. So it's everywhere, and even more frighteningly, it's a biofuel. And I think that's what's really going to drive the use of palm oil up now if we can't control our use of it.
And you've done some extensive research. Tell me about the research you've done and what you found.
Well, I was born in that part of the world in Sarawak, and went back to revisit it a few years ago, and was absolutely shocked to find a beautiful and precious rainforest reduced into a vast oil palm plantation. And the impact of that on the lives of the people who were living there and on the flora and fauna of this unique place in the world was devastating. The people in particular have been left with nothing, whereas obviously there's a certain section of society that has become very rich indeed, but that's just a handful of people.
Well, speaking of which, it has become so valuable in the industry because I'm assuming it's used so pervasively now. Talk about its value in economy now.
Well, billions and billions and billions have been made out of first cutting the timber in the Borneo jungle area, Sarawak, and then in converting to this quick monoculture, which again delivers a great deal of money. The problem is that that money is going into the hands of a very few people. And looking at your film, what really struck me is that you're worried about this industry moving into Africa. Let me tell you, many of the companies that are behind that are actually companies that started life, that have their roots in Sarawak. And they're now moving into jungled areas of Africa, getting their first profit out of the timber, which is worth billions, and then rolling out the oil palm.
It really is sort of a tricky balance, because the money that can be made, the argument can be made, that's good for the region.
I've been chasing some of that money. I've found it on the streets of London. I've found it in Australia. I've found it in the United States and in Canada. You don't find the money being invested back in the populations where this product is being grown. So let's be quite clear, the people who are making the money are outsiders, and the local people don't even get jobs out of this. Immigrant workers are being brought in from outside again, so that you're not even seeing an economy developing for the local people out of this crop. I'm not against palm oil, and I'm not against development, but this has got to be sustainable development with the people in mind in these countries, not instant wealth for politically connected people.
Well, based on your experience and the research you've done, what would you propose should be done to address both the use of it to boost the economy as well as saving the environment?
A lot of work is being done by NGOs across the world to bring awareness on this issue to the markets of the West. And so you are seeing campaigns now to stop the drive for biofuel and to look for palm oil that is sustainable if it's going to be used. In terms of the countries where this is being produced, and this is my project, what we're campaigning for is transparency and openness and an awareness that the driving force behind palm oil production in Malaysia is corruption, political corruption. And the objective is the enrichment of a handful of individuals. And that's what I've been exposing to very great effect in Malaysia over the last couple of years.
Well, I'm sure we'll have these conversations again in the future. Claire Rucastle-Brown, thank you so much for joining us live here in the studio.
Thanks.
We appreciate it. Jeff, back to you.
Thank you, Debbie. And here's a roundup of the other stories making the headlines today. A 5-year-old boy held hostage in a siege in Alabama is free after a week. His captor was killed as SWAT teams stormed the bunker to free the boy who was kidnapped from his school bus. He's been reunited with his family and is said to be in good health. Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad has touched down in Cairo. Muslim Brotherhood President Mohamed Morsi embraced his counterpart on the runway. It's the first time Egypt has been visited by an Iranian head of state since before the revolution in 1979. The two leaders will attend a summit of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation later this week. And French special forces are now guarding this uranium mine in Niger. French workers were kidnapped from the mine operated by Areva 3 years ago. In light of the recent assault by Islamist militants on the gas plant in Algeria, concerns are growing the mine could be the scene of a similar attack. Turning our attention to business, on Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is once again flirting with 14,000 points. Michael Wilson has all the numbers. Michael.
Certainly is flirting. Will it get a special date, though? This is the picture for US stocks. Rebounding, what was probably an overcorrection yesterday. There, in fact, are the British stocks, but that's what's actually happened as far as Europe's concerned. Again, pushing through. As far as the United States is concerned, as I said, within touching distance of 14,000. One catalyst for the markets today, home prices in the United States climbed 0.4% in December. Another sign that economic recovery is accelerating. Now, meanwhile, the US Justice Department is suing ratings agency Standard & Poor's. I asked our correspondent Chitra Norbat in New York, what is the government alleging?
The U.S. Department of Justice has filed a civil lawsuit against the S&P for wrongdoing on how it rated mortgage bonds prior to the 2008 financial crisis. The lawsuit is looking at 30 AAA-rated collateralized debt obligations, which are bonds. The S&P, from their perspective, they issued a statement, and they said that the bonds the Department of Justice is looking at received the same independent rating from another rating agency. The Department of Justice, they're seeking about hundreds of millions of dollars in settlement and the admission of wrongdoing, according to sources. And this lawsuit is going to be the first big federal enforcement action against a major credit rating agency alleging illegal behavior tied to the financial crisis.
Very interesting indeed. We'll have to follow that one closely, won't we? Now, we've been getting some more sort of soft economic news today. The latest a survey on planned investment by businesses. What does it tell us about how businesses see the economy?
Government data has recently reported that business investment plans were down for the month of December. And what this points to or suggests is that companies are losing confidence as it relates to the economy's strength. And that's because of fear around tighter fiscal policy. Economists did expect that business investment plans would be cautious because of the uncertainty around government spending cuts and tax increases. However, earlier this year, we've seen companies in their earnings report convey that they want to invest, they want to hire staff, and this includes companies such as Facebook and Amazon. Over the past few years, companies have pulled back on investments because of the economic environment. But analysts realize that now companies are in a situation where they don't have the appropriate capacity. And so companies now want to build back that production and infrastructure capability.
So remaining firmly grounded still is the Boeing Dreamliner, but there are signs, aren't there, that Boeing may be trying to bring this to a resolution?
That's right. The story on Boeing continues. Boeing has asked the Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA, for permission to conduct test flights of its 787 Dreamliner. This points that the company may have found resolution to the battery issues which caused the grounding of the entire fleet last month. What has happened is the battery issues caused a couple of fires on some aircrafts in January, and reportedly the FAA may give permission on Monday for Boeing to go ahead. They want to test a potential fix to the battery issue. As well, reportedly, passenger flights may not resume for weeks, if not months ahead.
OK, now let's get the latest finally, Chitta, if you would, on Dell. What's happening there?
Dell is going through a leverage buyout. The founder and CEO, Michael Dell, along with Microsoft and a private equity firm, are basically buying back the company for about $24 billion. And the view on this is that they want to, away from the public eye, rebuild the company, help to build back the product competitiveness, their competitive advantage, because Dell lost market share and they lost the premium position that they had in the marketplace in the PC space.
Chitta Nobat, thanks very much indeed for joining us from New York. Now you had a sneak preview of them before. Here they are again. Business optimism in the Eurozone, 8-month high. The UK service sector may help it dodge triple-dip recession. BP profits down a fifth. Everybody thought they would be. It's selling its assets in preparation for what could be its biggest oil spill payout coming to trial this month. All in a slight pullback from yesterday's correction. As far as the currencies are concerned, the pound rose today on the stronger than expected service sector purchasing managers data, but traders are wary of the monthly Bank of England meeting that culminates midday Thursday. Talk on the currency markets is that the French president wants a weaker euro and, get this, a special financial policy for the euro. Now, human rights issues around the manufacturing and selling of gold are on the agenda at the African Mining Indaba in Cape Town this week. The meeting has been told that gold investors are becoming increasingly interested in what they describe as a conflict-free gold standard to be introduced at the end of the year. Well, I'm joined by Desni Maisie from the Royal African Society. Is it actually possible to do something like that? Welcome to the programme.
Welcome. Sorry, hello. Thank you for having me on the programme, Mike. Yes. Well, the thing is, conceptually, this is possible. You know, it kind of follows the ethos of the Kimberley process, which was
about diamonds.
Which was about diamonds. So the point of this this move is in order to get gold producers to ensure that the gold that they are producing is not being used to fund illegitimate rebel movements or movements that will undermine governments or that contribute to people trafficking and so on.
How do they do that? 60% of companies have actually agreed to that, haven't they? How do you make sure, though, that the gold that is mined does not, as it were, go astray?
Well, that's quite... well, the thing is, everything that is produced within the formal economy, within the existing mining companies that are on the stock exchange and that are legitimate mining companies will be fine. However, the problem is what this tries to regulate is artisanal mining.
Artisanal, yes.
Yeah, so these are where people are panning for gold, and that's quite difficult to track because the thing is it's quite difficult to find the source of this. But the interesting thing about this is only a very small percentage of gold that is produced in the global economy, so that's the good news.
But it is 40 to 80 tonnes a year, isn't it, as I understand it?
That is significant. So, so it is worth making sure that governments come on board with making sure that whatever gold they're producing does not contribute to any human rights infringements.
I know the answer to this question, but I'll ask you, it must be extremely important, mustn't it, for something as important to Africa as gold for its export and the rest of it, must be seen to be decently produced and decently sold. That has to happen. Do you think it will? Do you think because this doesn't roll out, does it, till the end of the year?
I think this is really important for Africa in terms of, you know, just the general also Africa Rising narrative, which we've seen quite a lot of. And one thing that will enable and facilitate the success of that is if capital market regulation is sufficient, if companies are being seen to disclose and dealing in a manner with produce and commodities that are legitimate and that are not, you know, subject to any sort of dodgy dealings.
And finally, how important is it for there to be complete cooperation between companies and governments? That must be at the basis of it.
This is the difficult part, because in order for this to work, companies have to willingly disclose and cooperate with the government. And you know, one area of concern, for example, is the Congo, where there is a lot of you know, problems, for example. And you know, well, the thing is, with the Kimberley process, for example, you know, there has to be some kind of you know, two-way
agreement between to want to make it work,
because exactly, because the Kimberley process itself has been criticised by NGOs and so on. So it's for investors to follow up and make sure that this process is happening and hold the Gold Council themselves accountable for making sure that they don't bend the rules later when gold when global markets demand the commodities.
Desni, thanks very much indeed. Thanks for being on the programme.
Thanks very much.
That's Desni Maisie from the Royal African Society. Now, when you present your mother, you nearly went there, didn't you? You stay around, stick around. This is the good bit, actually. When you give flowers to your mother, or indeed your mother-in-law, with her flowers on Mother's Day next month, spare a thought for Kenya's flower farmers. Mother's Day and International Women's Day, two big dates for the international flower industry, fall in the same week as Kenya's general election on March the 4th. And if the events surrounding the last poll in early 2008 are anything to go by, there might be trouble. Then riots led to more than 1,000 deaths and brought exports to a standstill. The horticultural sector is worth $1 billion a year and brings most of Kenya's foreign exchange. Even Moscow regularly charters flights to deliver long-stemmed roses direct from Nairobi. And already the National Flower Council is in talk with government and security forces. And before the programme, Jeff told me that he, in fact, charters a plane for long-stemmed roses to give to your nearest and dearest. Actually, you don't need to, do you? From Kenya, because you're there, right? In any case.
That's an important thing. You can't forget the flowers.
Indeed. Okay. Thank you, Michael. As always, appreciate it. Now, sport now. And Singapore's reputation for low corruption crime has come under fire today after revelations that a criminal gang based in the city-state rigged hundreds of football matches in Europe and elsewhere. In just the latest indication that Singapore is at the heart of a global match-fixing empire, European police said they have smashed a network rigging hundreds of games. Europol say they have a 5-country probe has identified 380 suspicious matches targeted by a Singapore-based betting cartel. Now, it's the semi-finals of the Africa Cup of Nations tomorrow, and the Super Eagles of Nigeria have landed. New tournament favorites Nigeria arrived in Durban last night after beating the Ivory Coast at the weekend. The Super Eagles take on underdogs Mali at the Moses Mabhida Stadium tomorrow. The Ghana team, in the meantime, looked in good spirits heading into their semi-final match against Burkina Faso. And so they should be. Ghanaian players have been given a bonus of, get this, $35,000 apiece for advancing to the semi-finals. They come up against Burkina Faso at the Bombela Stadium in Nelspruit. Right now, our sports reporter Ife Fatunase joins us in the studio. Ife, $35,000, not a bad payday.
Not a bad payday. Let's hope they can go all the way. So tomorrow, semi-finals. So semi-finals of the Africa Cup of Nations. Games tomorrow: Nigeria versus Mali, and then it's Ghana taking on Burkina Faso. In the first game, Nigeria are the favourites to beat Mali. They're the favourites because they beat the Ivory Coast, who had been the previous favourites, but Nigeria had a victory over them 2-1. However, Mali did not get to the final by accident. They earned their spot in the semi-final. However, Mali, they are very good on penalties, so Nigeria really need to take it in normal time. But if it goes to penalties, we saw what Mali did with the host South Africa. Yeah. Mali know how to hold their nerve. They are very good when it comes to penalties, so Nigeria have to watch out for them. But Nigeria say they are not worried. This is what their forward, Uche, had to say about how they're preparing for the game.
Still in the process of getting some rest and prepare for the next game.
Okay. Do you think it will be a tough opponent, Mali?
Definitely, all opponents are all equal. They are tough, so it's a normal game we're going to play. Respect our opponents and play a very good game.
All right, now what about Burkina Faso?
Well, Burkina Faso, they take on Ghana. In this game, Ghana the favourites, but again, it's football, anything could happen. But at the moment, the match hasn't been the focus. The focus has actually been the stadium, the Mbella Stadium. This stadium has been quite controversial because of the sand on it. Quite a lot of the grass has died, and the pitch itself has been very hard to play. Ghana's coach, Apia, says that he's not worried about it. His team are concentrating on winning the match. However, the Burkina Faso coach, Paul Putt, his team have actually played their last 5 games on that pitch, so they're very used to those conditions, and they're going to use that as a psychological advantage against the Ghanaian team to show they can actually win.
Give us some predictions, Ife. Nigeria versus Mali.
As I said, I think Nigeria, if they can secure the victory in normal time, I am thinking it'll be 1-0. It'll be very, very close. But if it goes to penalties...
Ghana, Burkina Faso?
Ghana 2-1.
So we're looking at Nigeria versus Ghana in the finals, is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm expecting on Sunday. Finals on Sunday, so hopefully you'll see those two teams in there.
Any way you look at it, it's a West African affair.
That's right. Well, that's almost it for the new team here at Arise News Hour. We'll be back the same time tomorrow. But in the meantime, you can get updates online at www.arise.tv, or of course, follow us on Twitter at Arise TV.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Good night.